All right, Matthew 25 and 26. So coming through 24, right, we had a whole bunch of, even just before that, we had some very scathing rebukes of the Pharisees and the religious leaders of that time, basically saying that they were going to be judged. He was a little bit angry. And then he went through the seven woes. Then it goes into the end times where it's, basically the temple will be destroyed, not one stone on the other. Lots of judgment, lots of end times stuff mixed in, depending on your timing of all of that. And then you come into, he finishes sort of saying, like, and they wanted to know when. That was the other question, right? There was two questions. What are the signs of the times and when? So he's finishing with the when and saying, you never know when. And it goes into this parable of the 10 virgins, which is basically just sort of saying, hey, always be prepared for the coming of God because you don't know when, right? Uh, then he moves into the parable of the talents, which has, a couple ways of looking at it. It's a great story, great parable. Firstly, in the context, you're probably looking at it as a little bit of a judgment on the Jews, sort of saying, look, you were given these things from your master to do with what you could, and you didn't. You didn't try. You didn't do that, right? But even more so from just a personal, I think this is a very good parable for evaluating your own life. One, are you making use of what God has given? Some people he gives, you don't need to change the world. You're not necessarily, perhaps with your talents, you're not going to be a mega pastor in a church, or you are not going to be someone that does all this transformational stuff and create. But are you being faithful with what you have been given? Are you stewarding your financial resources, your emotional resources, your ability to support friends and family and others, to help poor, to help the church? Are you sort of stewarding your life appropriately and doing what you are able? Um, and for me, it's sort of a little bit of and also a look at other people that way. Like sometimes we have the tendency to be judgmental, but from God's point of view, you don't know what they were given for talents and how hard they're working just to get to where they are now. Right. So it's easy to sort of say, well, they're not making the decisions I want to make. But, what was God evaluating their heart? How is he evaluating their heart? You don't know that. Perhaps, they are struggling with some stuff that you don't even dream about. And God is incredibly happy with the progress that they're making. So just sort of a couple of ways to look through that parable of the talents. It's a really good one. So it moves quickly into the sheep and goats, which is actually a very surprisingly important. It sort of seems pretty simple, straightforward. When God comes, he's going to separate the real Christians and the non-Christians, right? And it is, that's true. It's a simple one. But the sorry about this cough. The critical importance in the big picture is that all the way through now, and we've talked about this, Jesus was really coming in his ministry on earth to preach and minister to the chosen people, Jews, Israel. This is right at the end. This is really the last story he tells, the last thing he says before the whole Hujamawatz goes on, right? So it's really his last teaching. And what he says is right here, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, and we'll talk about that in just a second. The Son of Man is going back to Daniel, and we'll talk about that, and all the angels with him. So, well, we'll talk about it now. It comes up again later. So, but we'll talk now. The Son of Man was in Daniel's vision. He has a vision of God on his throne, and this man, this human, comes rolling in right on the clouds, and ends up being raised up to sit at God's right hand, basically as God. Um, and it's sort of this, okay, but he's man, he's the Son of Man, he's called the Son of Man, and he's also God, right? So that is why Jesus likes this term for himself, Son of Man, all the way through. So when he says he comes rolling in his glory, you can look at that as end time stuff. We talked about that in 24, and we'll talk about the future. But I think what Jesus is really saying is like in that vision, he comes in as man rolling in, and then through the vision you establish that he's also God, right? So when Jesus dies on the cross and is raised up to the right hand of the Father, that is him coming on the clouds in his glory, right? That that situation is happening, whether you see him actually physically rolling in on a set of clouds. That might be too literal of a translation. What he's saying is that this is the point in the plot where you realize, hey, wait a second, he's also God. I didn't get that, right? So when the Son of Man comes in all his glory and all his angels with him and sit on his glorious throne, right? Um, this is a key one right here. It says all the nations. That little note A is actually this all the nations is the word that's usually translated Gentiles, right? And normally, basically, what Gentile means is anyone who's not Israel, who's not, Jewish or Hebrew, depending on your context and timing, right? So anyone else is called the Gentiles. So sometimes they call that the nations. They just say, the nations, meaning the other nations other than us. So here it says all the nations will be gathered before him, and it makes sense to translate it that way. But the other context is he's saying all the Gentiles, all the non-believers will be gathered before him, and he'll separate them one from another, just as a shepherd separates sheep from the goats. Sheep on the right, goats on the left. King will say to those on the right, come those who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world, right? So if you go all the way back to Abraham, the original promise to God's chosen people is that all nations will be blessed through you, right? But this is one of the clear sort of, I guess, message change from Jesus to sort of be like, hey, by the way, all the Gentiles are going to come before me and I'm going to separate them. There will be some who don't believe me, but there are going to be some who do, right? All of those on the right, the sheep, are going to inherit the kingdom that was prepared from the foundation of the world. So this plan was already in place, and I'm just executing this plan. But it's a pretty important piece for this. In verse, and it keeps going. It says, "For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink." Can you read through this? I actually mentioned this in a sermon not long ago, so sorry if this is repeating, right? But you get down to verse 40, it says the king will answer them, right? Because they said, when did we see you sick or in prison or visit you, right? When did we do that? And the king will answer them, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That phrase, brothers and sisters of mine, pretty much everybody agrees. Now you'll hear people expand this verse beyond what it means all the time. They'll use it, they'll leverage it to whatever they want. But everybody who's academic and actually looks at this faithfully and truthfully, even in my notes in my Bible, it says very specifically, brothers and sisters are believers, right? So it says, the king will answer them, truly, whatever you did for one of the least of these believers of mine, you did for me, right? Is that super important? Well, it is from the point of view of it sets a standard that that ordered loves that we talk about. It's in the Bible. A lot of people say you have to love everybody equally, whatever. And what he's saying here is, there is something to this family of believers, right? And it is a lot of time in John where it says, he's talking about loving believers. He's like, this is how people will know that you are my followers, is because you're going to love each other. Meaning, other you people are going to be different in your fraternity as believers, and this is important to him enough to say, "Hey, if you love your fellow believers and love your fellow Christians, you're going to be the sheep." Right? Does that mean we don't love the other? There are definitely sections where he says widows, orphans, other people, right? But he also goes in. Paul gives some distinctions of which widows and which orphans. So it's something that we just have to balance as Christians to understand that there is a unique love for believers. That's not a wrong thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not bad. Like, it's okay. There is a unique love for other Christians that we need to have and pull together in our church community. That doesn't mean he doesn't want us to go out and love others, because he would like for them to become part of our church community, right? And you can sometimes facilitate that by loving others beyond that, right? And they are made in the image of God, so they deserve love, right? But all in context as you go through. So, but whatever you did, this is also the Gentiles, though, right? For whatever you did, whatever you Gentiles, because he clearly says all the nations, the Gentiles will be gathered before him and he'll separate them, right? So whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters. So it's a pretty neat transition here. There's a lot sort of built into that one section of Bible to be say, hey, by the way, this is Jesus's last teaching, and it's an important one because this message is going to continue well past his original chosen people, and that we are going to be grafted in, as Paul says, into the people of God. So then we move into the plot climax or twist. The plot to kill Jesus. So when he tells these things, he says, hey, by the way, Passover's coming. And from there on, it's not going to be so good. So they have Passover. So Jesus was in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. One would assume that Jesus had healed that person, most likely, because that is the way society worked back then, right? But it's by the end of this, you get Judas getting his 30 pieces of silver. Something I didn't know, I just found out, is reference Exodus 21:32. It says that if your bull is running wild and you accidentally kill a slave, like if you kill a person, that's like manslaughter. Well, it goes through. Has the bull ever done it before? If not, it's an accident, and if it has, then it's manslaughter. Basically, you're saying like you killed this person, you might not have done it intentionally, but it's pretty important. Whereas if he only kills a slave, then you owe them 30 pieces of silver. Right, that's the price of a slave if you didn't purposely kill them. Like if you just go off and murder people, it's always murder. But if your bull goes off and you are a bit irresponsible, then you owe them 30 pieces of silver for a slave. So just an interesting note that I did not know until I saw that. So then you end up with the first Lord's Supper, which is an awesome little passage, right? So they are having the Passover meal. So the purpose of the Passover meal, you're celebrating this redemption from God, right? He redeemed the people from slavery in Egypt. He saved them and pulled them out of that situation and made them a people, right? And he did that through the death of the lamb and putting the blood of that lamb on the doorpost, and that allowed them to be saved and redeemed, right? So now Jesus is saying, hey, by the way, Hebrews uses the term that this stuff in the Old Testament are shadows of what's really what the real meat of this is, right? So that is a shadow of the real sacrifice that Jesus is coming to make. So he's repurposing this meal right here instead of saying that was a shadow. This is the real thing that's going on, right? And it says, drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, right? Which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. So he's repurposing this and saying basically, my blood is going to be this new sacrifice. The fact that I'm going to lay down my life for you is going to be this new sacrifice, sacrificial lamb. But if you go through the original Passover meal, there's actually 4 cups, and most people would believe, because it sort of matches exactly with this phrase, that he said that after the 3rd cup, because the 3rd cup is the redemption cup. And he tells the story about being redeemed, and we celebrate that with that cup. Interesting thing is the 4th cup is about the coming kingdom, right? So he says after he drinks it, right? This is my blood poured out for you, but I tell you, I won't drink from the fruit of this vine until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom, right? So that 3rd cup is the redemption. The 4th cup is the future kingdom. So he's sort of saying, I'm not going to have that until such time as the kingdom comes. So the rest of this is the prayer in the garden, basically, going in and saying, God, if you can, take this cup from me. And he says, but if not, thy will be done. Right? Which is been used. Hopefully, maybe if you're a new Christian, you never read this, it's a new thing to you. But if not, you've probably heard this type of expression before to sort of as a model for how we should be living our lives and say, hey, look, I get there are times where you don't want this to happen. This is serious version, but even smaller stuff is going to happen in your life to sort of say, but you need to surrender to God's lordship, right? Christ is Lord over your life all the time. And you can pray that certain situations go your way, but also understand his way is going to be his way, and he will make it that way, right? So that's the prayer in the garden. And then it continues on. Story of Judas's betrayal. It's pretty straightforward. You can just read through it, and sort of most of the story goes through. I'll add a little note here at the end, just on this Jesus faces the Sanhedrin. It said in verse 62, the high priest stood up and says, "Don't you have an answer for these men testifying against you?" But Jesus kept silent. The high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you're the Messiah, the Son of God." Um, and the way we would read this, we'd say, "You've said it," Jesus said. You've said it. That sort of for us would sort of mean like, oh, maybe you said it or whatever. That's him actually confirming, yes, I am the Messiah, Son of God. One, that's what that phrasing means in Hebrew. But two, if you cross-reference that with Mark 14:62 is the same event in Mark, and he says, "I am." Which is a pretty clear statement. And he says also, "I am, and from now on, you will see me coming in riding on the clouds." All right. Um, so right here, verse 64 says, "You have said it," Jesus told them, "but I tell you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power coming on the clouds of heaven." In Mark, it says, "I am, and from now on, you will see." Right. So basically, he's making reference to that Daniel vision, saying, "Hey, by the way, I am that guy, because now you're going to see I am human man, but I am also God, as is evidenced by the resurrection." Right. And they know, they get, like, obviously his reaction is like, if he was just saying, "Well, you say what you want to say," well, then the high priest would not have torn his robes and said he's blasphemed. Right. Why do we still need witnesses? So clearly he's saying, yes, yes, I am indeed the Messiah, the Son of God. So those of you that not those of you, those people out there that sort of say, "Well, Jesus, does he really say that he?" Yes, he does, and quite a few times he actually says that. So it's kind of a silly objection that people have. But anyway, and then it finishes with Peter, right? So even Peter, the rock of the church, where he says, "Look, you're going to deny me," and Peter's like, "No way, could never happen." It happens, right? But after the resurrection, surprisingly enough, all 11 plus the new disciple are faithful to the end and are willing to go to death without denying him. So something changed. They all bailed on him just before he was crucified and run away. And then after he comes back, they're like, "Whoa, this is the real thing. I'm going to, I am not going to deny him if it means death, being put on a cross upside down, being crucified, whatever it is," right? So clearly they saw something. So hopefully you enjoyed that. We will move into chapter 27 next week, and I hope you're blessed by your readings.